Ladies and gentlemen, here we go. We got solving quadratic equations using the old square root method. So now this is another tool in your toolbox. You should know how to factor and solve. And now we're going to use what's called the square root method, or using square roots. Okay. So as you kind of read through, it says one way to solve quadratic equations is using the factoring technique. Where there is a quadratic term that is linear term, we can try to solve it using factoring. So if it's a trinomial, we can use factoring. Okay. However, there's only one quadratic term and can be a square roots of these to solve the equation. We just need to remember that you can only take the square root of a positive number. So that means you cannot square root a negative. Okay. It's impossible. Can't do it. Okay. So always need to check our solutions to make to any equation. Okay, so that's what it says. So little steps. So some people need the steps. Okay, so in order to solve an equation using square roots, we can follow these steps. Isolate the quadratic term. So we want to get the x squared, or in example 1, we want the z squared by itself. Okay. Step 2, we're going to take the square root of both sides and then solve. Okay. So as I take a look, I'm going to show you 2 ways to do number 1. Step 1, so the old way, using factoring, what we just learned, we'll do on the left. And now the new way, the square root way, is the new way for this one. Okay. So first off, I got z squared equals 49. Using factoring. So from what the last lesson, what did we just learn to do? Yes?
I need a packet.
You need a packet.
I think we need to get Oregon.
All right, so again, we're looking to factor. What's the first thing we got to do if we're going to factor? Gail, get your stuff equal to 0. Go ahead and subtract this guy over. So now I've got z squared minus 49 equals 0. Very good. Okay. Now, teach me how to factor t. Teach me how to factor. Factors of z squared we know are z and z. What are factors of negative 49 that add up to nothing because there's no middle term? Jet, you got those?
Negative 7 and positive 7.
Yeah, so negative 7, positive 7, or positive 7, negative 7. Then we set each one equal to 0. And we get z equals 7. And subtract the 7 over, we get negative 7. So those are our 2 solutions. So that's the old way to do it. Okay. Now we have a new way. It's called the square root method. We have the z squared equal 49 to start. And all we're going to do, to undo the squaring, we're going to square root it. Okay. And when we square root this guy, we got to square root this guy. So if you do it to one side, you got to do it to the other side. So when you square root something squared, you get that guy, z. So square rooting something squared is like dividing something that's been multiplied or adding something that's being subtracted. It undoes it. Okay. Well, what's the square root of 49, guys? It's 7. Okay. You guys know on the calculator how to do that, right? Square roots on the calculator. We know how to do that. Yeah. On the big fancy ones, TI 84s, we know how to do that. Okay. Now, if you say that's your answer, you're technically wrong. Okay. Because with a quadratic, and let me see if I still have that drawing up here. With a quadratic, how many answers are there? Most of the time, there's how many? There's usually 2 answers. Well, we just came up with one of them. Guess what the other one is? The negative. So you'll hear me say, anytime you use the square root method, don't forget your plus or minus. Okay. Now, technically, it becomes the absolute value of z equals 7, and that becomes plus or minus. But just to make it easy, we're going to go from this step right to this step. So again, don't forget your plus or minus. Okay, and that's it. So instead of getting your stuff equal to 0 and factoring, we're just going to square root both sides, and then we have it solved. Yes, sir?
What's it called a quadratic formula if there's only two ways? Like quad.
Why is it called a quadratic? So why is it a quad?
Yeah.
Because it's 4? That's a good question. I'd have to think about it. Why they use quad as in terms of a quadratic. I have to think about why that. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I have to think about it. Okay? Or investigate why they call it that.
It's still called a quadratic formula. It's above the x-axis. Above the x-axis.
So quadratics means that it is squared. That you have something squared. Okay. Now, when we're talking about a room and we want to find the area of a four-sided shape, we'll take and if it's a square, we'll take the two sides and multiply them together, which is side times side or side squared. That's a quadrilateral, right? A four-sided shape. So maybe that's why they call it quadratic. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at number 2. As I take a look at number 2 now, we don't need a factor anymore. They're just going to use the new step. And the new thing to do is if I have y squared equals my number, all I got to do to solve for y is to square root both sides. So we square root, and the square root of 256. What's the square root of 256? Okay, 16. So I'm just going to rewrite it here so it's a little bit bigger. So I square root it, and I get 16. Now if I circle that, it's wrong. Why is it wrong? Your symbols. Don't forget your plus or minus sign. There again, quadratic, you should have 2 answers most of the time. And there we go. Yes, sir?
On the test, do we write it like that?
Like this. You can write it like this. So good question. How do I write the answer? I usually write it like this, or if you prefer, you can do 16 and negative 16. Okay, me personally, I'll do it like this. It's just shorter, less writing. I'm a big fan of it. Okay. All right, now we got to do a little algebra sometimes. All right. As I take a look, I've got h squared minus 25, and now that equals negative 125. Okay. Well, we're trying to get this guy, this h squared, by himself. Okay. Well, right now he's not by himself. We need to isolate it. So how do we move this negative 25 over? Ivan? Yeah, just add it over. Okay. So now what we have is h squared equals negative 100. Negative 100. And now how do I get rid of the squared? Yeah. Square root it. What's the square root of 100? Put it in your calculator. If I type it in. The square root of 100 is 10. Well, look at what happens when I type in my calculator. If I go square root, by the way, guys, up here, you'll see x squared in the kind of kitty corner of the 7. So press second x squared if you got the fancy calculator. If I do negative 100 and press enter, and I get an error message. You guys cannot do square roots of negatives. Okay, so there's no real answer here. Okay, so the square root of a negative, we call this the empty set, the null set, no solution. There's what we call an imaginary solution there, but we're not going to dive into that quite yet. So this is what we call a no real solution, or no solution, circle the slash through it, it's fine. Okay, so big thing here, guys, is anytime you square root a negative, no real solution. So maybe highlight this on your notes so you don't forget that. When in doubt, you're not really sure, just throw it in your calculator and get an error message. Okay, no.
Is your imaginary number because it has to be both positive and negative simultaneously? Because if like we were to divide it by
So when you square root a negative, there's you're breaking it down into two numbers that multiply together that will give you that number. There's no way to break down negative 100 to get two factors that are the same that give you negative 100, because factors of a negative, one's a plus and one's a minus, so those aren't the same. That's why this is not possible. That's why it's no solution. To answer, hopefully that answers your question. Damien.
So when there's a negative number, you can't, that's no solution.
It's an automatic. If you get this guy isolate equals a negative, just write no real solution, because it is not possible. Okay. There's something called an imaginary solution, but again, we're not quite there yet. Okay. These are all good questions. Let's take a look at number 4. I've got 5p squared minus 45. First thing you would do is try to get this p squared by itself. How do you do that? How can I get p squared by itself? Take a guess. Colton. Add 45 over. So now I got 5p squared equals 45. I got 2 more steps. What can we do? How do I get this guy? Rylan. Divide by 5. These guys cancel. I get p squared equals, what's 45 divided by 5, guys? 9. And now we're ready to square root both sides. Square root of 9 is 3. And if you circle that, it's wrong. What did we forget? Don't forget the plus or minus sign. So final answer. On this section, guys, that would be the hardest one I would give you. Okay, where you would have to add or subtract over, divide, and square root. You should be able to solve it. Okay. All right. Last but not least, let's do the last one, number 5, and we're done for today. Number 5, I got 6c squared equals 24. First thing you would do. First thing, Mag, what would you do here to get this c squared by itself? Divide by 6. C squared equals what? 4. How do I get the c by itself? How do I get rid of the squared? Square root it. What's square root of 4? 2. Is that the right answer? No, sir. Don't forget the plus or minus sign. Okay. So every answer you're going to get for these are going to be plus or minus, unless you square root a negative, and then it's a no solution. Okay. We're just going to do basic, easy ones on this. Any questions back there? Yeah.
Do you always have to put those symbols?
That plus or minus sign? Yes, sir. There's always going to be 2 answers when you square both sides. Yes, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Guys, that's where I'm going to leave it for today. We had 2 other examples, which I'm not. Oh, you know what? Let's do one more. I want to do, sorry, we got to do 16, or number 6. I want to show this one because it's a special one. Special case. Okay? First thing you would do, got to show 6, guys, before we get out of here. So again, write this one down. Here we go. First thing we do, what? Add the 36 over. Right? We get 16n squared equals 36. We divide by 16. Okay, before I do anything, I like to reduce if I can. Can I reduce 36/16? What is that reduced by? What are they both divisible by? Yeah? 4? They both divide by 4, right? So R by 4. What's 36 divided by 4? What's 36 divided by 4? 9. What's 16 divided by 4? 4. So now we have this guy. Okay? So far, so good. Any questions how I went from 36/16 to 9/4? Just reduced, right? 36 is 9 times 4, and 16 is 4 times 4. It's just the 4's cancel. Now, you're going to square root a fraction. When you square root a fraction, guys, you just square root the top and you square root the bottom. This is why I want to talk about this one, okay? So again, we get n. What's the square root of 9? 3. What's the square root of 4? So we get 3 over 2, and is that the answer? Don't forget the plus or minus sign. Okay, so we get plus or minus 3 halves there. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for notes. If you take a look at